$40 billion of naval firepower, 2 carrier strike groups, 8 Aegis destroyers carrying the most sophisticated weapons systems ever put on water. The United States Navy sent all of it to the Strait of Hormuz, and the strait stayed closed. Not because the Navy lost, not because a single American vessel was sunk, or a single engagement went the wrong way. The Navy won every fight it entered, and the problem did not move. That is the question this video is built to answer. Not who won the engagements. The Navy won every one. But why winning every engagement was not enough to reopen a shipping lane that the entire global economy depends on, and why the solution came from a 50-year-old airplane the Air Force had been trying to retire for a decade. The math, when you run it correctly, is one of the most counterintuitive equations in the history of modern warfare. Subscribe to Navy Decoded. We do not celebrate weapons. We calculate whether they work. And this calculation is going to change how you understand naval power for the rest of your life. To understand why the most capable naval force ever assembled could not solve a problem that a Cold War aircraft solved in its first sortie, you need to understand what the problem actually is. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. That number sounds manageable. It is not the right number. The actual shipping corridor, the navigable lane where tankers must pass, is 6 nautical miles. 2 miles inbound, 2 miles outbound, 2 miles of buffer between them. That is the entire playable space. Everything outside that corridor is Iranian territorial water. Now consider what is operating inside that space. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy fields more than 1,500 fast attack craft, not warships. Composite hull speedboats, most under 15 tons, the slowest running at 50 knots, the fastest exceeding 70. Each one carries an anti-ship missile. Each one costs between $50,000 and $500,000, and their doctrine is precise. Deploy 30 to 50 boats simultaneously from every direction. Overwhelm the sensors. Saturate the point defense systems. Force the destroyer to make targeting decisions, knowing that every weapon the destroyer fires costs more than every boat it aims at. That last sentence is the entire Iranian strategic calculation. Let us look at the engagement economy. An SM-6 interceptor costs $5.3 million. A composite speedboat costs $50,000. That is a 100-to-1 cost ratio in Iran's favor on every single engagement. A Harpoon missile costs $1.5 million and was engineered to track cruiser-sized targets, not fiberglass hulls doing 70 knots between container ships. The Mark 45 5-inch deck gun fires 20 rounds per minute, effective against one target, arithmetically hopeless against 50. The Phalanx CYWS empties its magazine in 20 seconds and requires 4 minutes to reload, and the F/A-18E Super Hornet, the carrier's primary strike aircraft, costs $30,000 per flight hour and it crosses the shipping lane at 500 knots, which means every surface target stays in the pilot's field of view for less than 2 seconds and cannot reliably distinguish an IRGC fast boat from a Kuwaiti fishing dhow among 3,200 civilian vessels sitting at anchor. These aren't bad weapons, that is a pattern. Every weapon in the carrier strike group's arsenal was engineered for blue water, open ocean, high-value targets. Long-range engagements where expensive munitions are matched to expensive threats. The Strait of Hormuz is brown water, a 6-mile corridor jammed with cheap, fast, numerous targets hiding inside the largest collection of civilian shipping in the world. The Navy brought a precision laser to a knife fight, and the knife fight needed something else entirely. Now, the irony is that something else already existed. The Pentagon just wanted to discard it. If you have spent any time following the A-10 retirement debate, you already know the official position: obsolete, redundant, survivability concerns in a contested airspace. Those arguments are not unreasonable. In a high-end fight against a peer adversary with advanced air defenses, The Warthog's relatively slow speed and low-altitude flight profile create vulnerabilities that a fifth-generation aircraft does not carry. But the Strait of Hormuz is not a high-end fight. It is a brown water attrition problem. And the Warthog was built for exactly this kind of arithmetic. Here is what most of the retirement debate consistently missed. The A-10 Thunderbolt II is not an airplane fitted with a gun. It is a GAU-8/A Avenger cannon that happens to have wings. The cannon was designed first. The aircraft was designed around it. 7 rotating barrels, 30mm depleted uranium rounds, 3,900 rounds per minute, 65 rounds per second. The aircraft carries 1,150 rounds in a drum roughly the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. A standard 2-second burst puts approximately 130 rounds downrange. Cost per armor-piercing round, $137. Into a fiberglass fastboat, that engagement costs under $10,000. The same kill with an SM-6 costs $5.3 million. That is not a marginal improvement in engagement economics. That is a 500-to-1 categorical shift, and that shift is what changes the entire equation at Hormuz. Oh, but the gun is only the entry fee. The A-10 carries 16,000 pounds of ordnance across 11 hardpoints. For medium-range threats out to 12 nautical miles, it fires the AGM-65 Maverick, an infrared-guided missile costing between $150,000 and $170,000, still 30 times cheaper than an SM-6. For fast boats running mixed with drone threats in close quarters, the A-10 carries APKWS, a laser guidance kit mounted on a standard Hydra 70 rocket. Cost per precision shot, approximately $35,000. Guided accuracy at the price of a mid-range sedan. Now consider the physics that make those weapons viable specifically at Hormuz. The A-10's maximum speed is Mach 0.75. In sustained patrol at low altitude, it flies at approximately 300 knots. When the retirement debate treated that speed as a universal liability, it is not. In a brown water environment where the mission is visual identification of civilian military mixed targets inside a 6-mile corridor, 300 knots is not a weakness. It is the entire value proposition. At 500+ knots, the F/A-18E gives the pilot 2 seconds of visual contact per pass. At 300 knots, the A-10 gives that pilot 5 to 6 seconds. That is not a minor difference. That is the difference between guessing and confirming. The pilot looks through the canopy, identifies the rocket launchers mounted to the hull, identifies the military paint scheme, and engages. No heads-down sensor display, no algorithmic target classification, direct visual confirmation before every trigger pull. The A-10 also stays where it is. With external fuel tanks, loiter time over the Strait reaches 2.5 hours. The F/A-18E, operating from a carrier 200 miles away at combat loadout, has a fraction of that on-station time by the time it arrives and must account for the return leg. The A-10 does not burn fuel racing to and from the fight. It parks in the kill zone and waits. The wing design is the engineering reason why. The A-10 uses straight wings rather than the swept wings of modern fast jets. Swept wings reduce drag at high Mach numbers. They also increase drag at low speeds. The A-10 never needs high Mach. At 300 knots, straight wings generate lift more efficiently, burn fuel more slowly, and produce a tighter turn radius. In a 6-mile corridor, that tighter turn radius means the A-10 can bank, reverse, and re-enter its patrol loop without ever leaving the engagement zone. That same wing stability makes the GAU-8 more accurate. Less airframe oscillation at low speed means rounds go where the pilot aims during a strafing pass. And one more number about that gun, The recoil force of the GAU-8 at full rate is approximately 45 kilonewtons, 10,000 pounds of force. Each of the A-10's two TF-34 engines produces roughly 40 kilonewtons of thrust. In a 2-second burst, the gun generates nearly as much rearward force as one engine produces forward. The aircraft physically decelerates during firing. That is the measure of how much kinetic energy each round is delivering downrange. Each 30mm depleted uranium penetrator leaves the barrel at over 1,000 meters per second. A fiberglass fast boat has zero armor, and this is not a fair fight. It was never designed to be, and when the fire comes back, the A-10 absorbs it. The pilot sits inside a 12,200-pound titanium enclosure, the only cockpit in the American inventory armored to withstand 23mm armor-piercing rounds and 57mm fragmentation. In Desert Storm, Colonel Bobby Efferson returned with 378 holes in his airframe. In Baghdad in 2003, Captain Kim Campbell of the 75th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron lost both primary and backup hydraulic lines over the city and flew her aircraft home on manual reversion, a system of cables and mechanical cranks that bypasses every electronic and hydraulic controlled surface. She landed safely. The Distinguished Flying Cross followed, at Hormuz, to the IRGC's coastal emplacements fired 12.7mm and 14.5mm machine guns. The F/A-18E avoids that threat altitude and loses target identification. The A-10 flies through it, takes the hits, and keeps shooting. That survivability is not a footnote. It is the operational foundation everything else is built on. Save this video. What comes next is the part of this analysis that almost no coverage of the Hormuz situation has gotten right, and you will want a reference point for it. One aircraft, however durable, cannot hold a 6-mile corridor alone. What is happening above the Strait of Hormuz right now represents something the American military has never executed in combat before. 3 branches of the armed forces operating simultaneously over a single 6-mile naval corridor, each one filling a gap the other 2 cannot cover. The first layer is the Air Force. The A-10 flies racetrack patterns at 3,000 feet, hunting fast boats and coastal missile positions. GAU-8 and APKWS handle close-range threats. Maverick handles targets at 12 nautical miles, cost per flight hour $19,000. The second layer is the Army. H-64 Apache attack helicopters operating from expeditionary sea bases, floating forward operating bases for Army aviation, a concept first tested operationally in 2020 aboard the USS Lewis B. Puller and now deployed at scale. Army attack helicopters staging from a Navy platform to fight a naval battle. Each Apache carries up to 16 Hellfire missiles at $70,000 to $200,000 each, plus a 30mm M230 chain gun. They fly at 200 feet, hung below the A-10's racetrack, engaging the fast boats that slip through the first layer. The third layer is the Navy. Aegis destroyers maintaining the air defense umbrella and holding their SM-6 inventory for threats that actually justify the cost. Anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles flying at Mach 3, directed energy systems handling drone swarms. The vertical launch cells that were being drained by $50,000 speedboats are now preserved for the threats nothing else in the inventory can stop. Here is the convergence equation. Before combined arms, the Navy was engaging fast boats with SM-6 interceptors. $5.3 million per shot against $50,000 targets, 90 to 96 VLS cells per destroyer, many already committed to Tomahawks, SM-2s, and ESSM quad packs. When the math was intentional on Iran's side, The IRGC studied the 2002 Millennium Challenge wargame, in which a retired Marine Lieutenant General used swarm boats to sink 16 American warships in the opening phase. Iran built an entire naval strategy around that simulation, 1,500 fast boats against 96 vertical launch tubes. They did the arithmetic before the first boat left the dock. They built it for a scenario where the Navy fights alone. After combined arms, the A-10 handles fast boats for $10,000 per engagement. The Apache handles close-in threats for $70,000. The Navy preserves its missile cells for Mach 3 threats. The VLS inventory lasts 10 times longer. The math flips. Iran's strategic miscalculation was not military, it was architectural. When their swarm doctrine was a precise calculation built on one assumption, that the Navy would answer alone. They did not account for an Air Force aircraft flying at 3,000 feet at 65 rounds per second. They did not account for an Army aviation element launching from a Navy vessel. The equation changes when the variables change. That brings us to the question that almost no one asking about the A-10's retirement has put correctly. The Warthog will leave. Congress currently prohibits the Air Force from reducing the fleet below 103 aircraft through September 2026, but the transition plan for 2027 through 2029 remains open. The retirement debate has been running for years on the wrong axis, arguing about the aircraft's vulnerability in a high-end peer fight against a near-peer adversary with integrated air defenses. That is a real concern, but it is not the only question. The question Hormuz just forced into the open is different. When the A-10 leaves, what fills its specific role in a brown water environment when the next contested corridor appears? Loitering munitions with 30mm cannons. MQ-9 Reapers adapted for maritime interdiction, or perhaps a purpose-designed platform built not for deep ocean capital ship warfare, but for the 6-mile corridors where the actual attrition happens. The answer does not yet exist. Seat and the fact that it does not exist while the A-10 is still flying is what should concern every analyst looking at the next 20 years of naval competition. If this breakdown changed how you see the relationship between weapon cost, tactical environment, and strategic outcome, subscribe to Navy Decoded. We do not tell you what to think about these systems. We run the equations and show you what the numbers say. That is a different channel than the ones celebrating hardware. Think about someone following the Hormuz situation through mainstream coverage who is still framing this as a Navy versus Iran story. Send them this. The actual story is an Air Force aircraft and an Army aviation element operating from a Navy platform solving a problem the Navy's own doctrine never anticipated. That reframe is worth more than anything the headline coverage produced. If you want to understand the deeper mechanism underneath the combined arms equation, specifically why American military doctrine defaults to expensive solutions even when cheaper ones exist, and what has to fail before the system corrects itself, that video is already on this channel. The question this video raised but could not fully answer is an institutional one, not a tactical one. It goes further than the Strait of Hormuz. A good engineer does not use a wrench to hammer a nail. A good engineer selects the right tool, maintains it until the job is done, and replaces it only when a better tool exists, not when the procurement cycle demands it. The most powerful Navy in human history called the Air Force because the Air Force had the right tool. The right tool costs $19,000 per flight hour. The wrong tool costs $30,000. The right kill costs $10,000. The wrong kill costs $5.3 million. We do not worship the machine, we worship the equation. Drop Warthog in the comments if you think the numbers settled the argument. And if there is a specific moment in this analysis, a cost ratio, a weapon system limitation, a tactical detail that made the combined arms logic finally click for you, put it below. The best thinking in this community consistently comes from people watching the same fight from different angles.